Eileen, thanks so very much. My name is Harold Stephens. I'm an attorney and mediator in Huntsville with Bradley Arant. I very much appreciate the opportunity to do this presentation along with my good friend and fellow mediator, Cooper. I was thinking back 2 years ago, if you had asked me about Zoom, I would have said that that's something that running backs and defensive backs do when they're running the 40-yard dash, Zoom, right? And little did I know it would turn from a verb into a noun. So Cooper and I love doing mediations, and let me be clear about this. In our perfect world, we'd love to do mediations in person, but certainly COVID unfortunately changed our world, as we all know, in many ways. So one of the things that we've now learned is we have this wonderful tool of being able to do virtual mediations. And while we don't necessarily think that virtual mediations are ever going to take the place of doing mediations with live people and being able to sit at a conference table and look across at people, we know that even in the long haul, when the insurance rep is in California or Michigan, or when there's an out-of-state party, or for whatever reason, Zoom or some other platform may be a tool for us to use. And so we're looking forward to talking with you about that today. Before I turn it over to Cooper, I do want to give credit where credit is due, and credit is really due to Eileen Harris. Eileen, for a long time, had been wanting us to put something out that would offer some guidelines and helpful tips for mediators in Alabama doing Zoom mediations. And frankly, we looked around a lot of different materials out there. There are a number of articles online, of course, but at the end of the day, Cooper and I decided the better approach was let's do something for Alabama mediators that really fits with how we do mediation in Alabama. And so that led to us coming up with the paper you have. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to my good friend, Cooper Shattuck.
Thanks, Harold. I'm honored to be a part of any panel with Harold Stephens. And of course, I'm willing to help Eileen in any way possible. She does a fantastic job at the center, and we're fortunate to have her in that role. But let's get started. That's why we're here, right? So I want to start first talking just generally about the setting and the technology that needs to be considered when you're talking about someone or everyone participating in a mediation virtually. Obviously, one of the things we gain by virtual mediation, the ability of Zoom, is an appearance, a physical appearance digitally, virtually, by one or more people. Gosh, we used to have people join mediations by phone, and we know the limitations of that, but the beauty of Zoom is we can actually see at least part of them and see their faces. So the first consideration is your camera. Now, if you have a laptop or even a desktop, it probably came with a camera built in, and that camera may be fine. If your computer was purchased in the last few years, it may be great, and that's what you can use. If it's not, it's simple enough to buy a standalone camera. You can get them through Amazon, Best Buy, whatnot. They're not expensive. You can spend a lot on them. There's no need to. You can get a high quality camera for less than $50, and they're easy to add to your computer system. You can just plug them in, USB port, and most of them are plug and play. It will do it for you. So check your camera out that you have existing, see what it looks like, have somebody give you some honest feedback. And if it's not high quality, buy one, plug it in, and then make sure you test it and know how to use it before you're scheduled for mediation, either as a mediator or a participating party. If you do use your existing camera and your laptop's been traveling around in your briefcase, or your desktop may not be as clean as it ought to be, get a Q-tip and a little alcohol, and you can clean the little lens where your camera is. Believe it or not, that makes a huge difference in the quality that you'll portray. While we're talking about hardware, microphone, critically important. Again, your computer may have a built-in microphone. That's fine, depending on how well it works. I've found from my setup anyway that a standalone microphone seems to work better. And I've got one here that, again, less than $100. It may have been less than $50, but the sound quality is much better. And when someone's listening to you in a prolonged mediation, the quality of the sound and the quality of the picture that they're looking at makes a big difference after an hour or so. So investing in a good microphone is important. While we're talking about sound, we've got to remember that there's a lot that goes into the sound besides the microphone. If you're in a large room with a lot of hard surfaces like tiled floor, empty walls, and a cavernous room, that echo is easily picked up, especially by built-in microphones. The built-in microphones are trying to gather as much as possible because they don't know what sound you want to record. One thing about a standalone microphone is most of them are directional, or you can control where the sound is coming from, and that's why you get a better sound. But if you're using your built-in microphone and you're in one of those cavernous rooms, there's things you can do to make it work better. You can put some pillows around, some fabrics around, hang some curtains out of view of the camera to absorb some of the sound. A lot of professional podcasters have found themselves with COVID recording their podcasts from closets in their house, and they surround themselves with pillows and fabrics, and you get a studio quality sound. We need to think about the same thing. Lighting is something that we have to consider when we're talking about a visual appearance. A camera is important, but if you don't light the subject well, then you're not going to give a good impression, and you may not even get a good image. So if you are not adequately lit, your image will be grainy. Now, what's behind you doesn't need to be well lit, but you certainly need to be. There are ring lights that you can get, again, not very expensive. I have one here. You can see it reflected in the picture behind me that is centered. You want your camera to be relatively centered in the circle of the light. And that sort of gives you a better appearance. You certainly don't want light behind you because that's not a good image. If you don't have a ring light, you can use a lamp. Take a lamp, take the shade off, maybe put a piece of wax paper or something between you and the bulb, and then strategically place it so you're not casting any suspicious looking shadows or scary shadows behind you. Again, the key to all of this is going to be preparation, just like you do for mediations as a mediator or a participating party. You prepare, and all of these things just require thinking ahead of time. So when it comes to lighting, it's something you need to explore, see how it looks. The other thing to think about when you get your hardware set up is, what's the view? What are people looking at? You want to make sure that you fill up most of the view. There's lots of beautiful conference rooms out there that you guys have. I've seen them. And unfortunately, I've seen them in mediations because the camera is set up at one end of the conference room and everybody participating is at the other. It's a beautiful conference room, but I can't tell who's talking. So if you're that far away from the camera, that's not an effective way to build a rapport or communicate either with the mediator or with the parties if you are the mediator. So get a little closer. That's important because that's your way to connect with people. When you do have something behind you, be mindful of what it is. This is my background here is probably not ideal for every situation. If I'm doing an arbitration, I have a curtain that I put up over the bookshelves. When I do a mediation, I like to have a busy bookshelf because it's a way for people to engage during the day. They'll say, hey, what is that behind yours? Who is that a picture of? And you start to build a a connection with people through those things. But be mindful of book titles and art so that you don't have something that might be offensive or send the wrong message. You guys were all friends, so I'm not worried about you, but you got to be mindful of it. Certainly, you don't want to have, a view of another room that people are walking back and forth in, or anything like that. So clean up a little bit, straighten up so that it's not cluttered. The next thing that we need to think about in the setting and the technology is the internet connection. After all, it's carrying the bandwidth for your video and your audio. Generally, a hardwired connection to the internet is best, but Bluetooth or Wi-Fi will work as well. Make sure that your Wi-Fi connection is solid and good and fast enough to support your broadcast and your reception. Again, how do you do that? By preparing ahead of time and practicing ahead of time to make sure that you've got the bandwidth to manage it. Think about potential distractions, not just in the view, but things that may occur that you can prevent, like a dog coming into the room, or children, or a spouse, or coworkers, whatever the case may be. Put a note on your door and close it that says "Do not disturb." Try to schedule things around when you're going to be doing your Zoom mediation so that there's not an interruption. Now, inevitably, there's going to be something that happens outside that you can't control. Again, a standalone microphone might help to limit that or isolate that. But a little planning goes a long way on preventing those kinds of distractions from occurring. The platform, Zoom is something we're using right now, and it tends to be used by most people. I used Zoom actually before the pandemic, and I thought, wow, what a great thing. I need to buy stock in this company. This is amazing. I didn't, and here I sit. So I wish I had, because now everybody knows what Zoom is and they're used to using it. There's other platforms. Most of them operate the same way with the same features. If you're going to be doing a mediation on a platform with which you're not familiar, practice ahead of time. Try it out ahead of time and see how it differs from what you're used to, so that you'll be prepared to effectively either serve as a mediator or as a representative of one of the parties.
So at this point, I'd like for us to focus on some tips for you, the mediator. So if you are a mediator, or if you're thinking about being a mediator, or if you go to mediations, you might want to pay close attention here. Hosting a mediation, of course, by Zoom is a lot different than simply participating in one. But remember, when it comes to mediation, if you're the mediator, you are the person in charge. In the land of Oz, you would be the wizard. So some pointers that Cooper and I have come up with, starting prior to the mediation. The first thing to do well in advance of the mediation is please get everyone's name and cell phone numbers that will be participating in the mediation. Technical issues don't happen a lot these days, but obviously they do happen sometimes. And if someone gets disconnected, if someone can't get back in, if someone just needs some help, a great tool to have available is to have everyone's cell number, and give everyone, if you're the mediator, give everyone your cell number. And of course, don't forget, cell phones are wonderful things. Sometimes even when you can't get a signal to call someone, don't forget text messages sometimes still work. And if you want to scare yourself or impress your friends, just ask Siri sometime to identify all the airplanes that are above you right now. It's scary, the power we have in our cell phones. But step one, get everyone's cell phone numbers. When you get the mediation schedule, of course, you're going, as the mediator, you're going to want to send out a Zoom invite, a Zoom invitation. I like to do that really right away. If we know that's going to happen by Zoom when we schedule the mediation, let's go ahead and send the invite out. And then 2 or 3 days prior to the mediation, if you're the mediator, again, send everyone a reminder about the Zoom connection. Pre-mediation conferences, let's talk about that for a few minutes. Some of you as mediators just routinely do these anyway in mediations. And I'll just say, you know, I often, but not always, have pre-mediation conferences with the attorneys. I certainly think it's a good thing to do. It's a great time to find out more information about the facts about the case. It's a good opportunity 2 or 3 days in advance of the mediation just to touch base with the lawyers, be sure everybody's on board. We're doing this by Zoom. Do we have everyone lined up and is going to be present virtually? I would remind everyone under Rule 10, mediations, of course, are private, but in the context of an alleged victim of domestic or family violence, for those of you who do domestic relations mediations, victims can have in attendance at mediation a supported person of his or her own choice. In all other cases, persons other than the parties attend only with the permission of the mediator and the parties. And let me say a brief word about that. It's not unusual. In fact, it happens fairly commonly in my experience that you may have a spouse who wants to attend who is not a party to the mediation. And I generally tell folks that's fine with me as long as they are helpful in the process. I remind them, of course, about confidentiality, and I let the other room know that the spouse is there. So, you know, that's not a problem. I tell the spouse at the beginning that I, as the mediator, reserve the right, because mediations are private, to invite them at some point if there is a problem that comes up to step outside the mediation, wait in the conference room or whatever. Thankfully, I've only had to do that one time. But a pre-mediation conference is a good opportunity to figure out if you're going to have any obstacles along the yellow brick road of a Zoom mediation. So let's talk next about the waiting room. Under your settings, you'll want to enable waiting room, and everyone who comes in to join the meeting, just as you are today, will have to be admitted by the host. You might think of it as function of a receptionist who shows people to their private conference rooms. But remember and remind everyone, if they're coming into the waiting room, once they get admitted, about who's there. And this is an opportunity. I know there's still some mediators out there who like to have joint opening sessions, not something I routinely do, but if you want to have a joint opening session, this is an opportunity to do that. I sort of think of the waiting room as my reception area at my office. But if you did want to have a joint session, the waiting room would be the time and place you could do that. And then next, let's talk about breakout rooms. You also, if you're doing a Zoom mediation, will want to enable breakout rooms. In your settings, you would find this under In Meeting Advanced. And it's very simple to think about these breakout rooms as your private conference rooms. I do want to say a word of thanks to Julie Holderfield in our Birmingham office. She's a senior technology trainer, and attached the materials you received from Eileen is a great step-by-step guide for handling and dealing with breakout rooms. You'll obviously want to get breakout rooms set up in advance of the mediation. You'll want to name your breakout rooms. And let me just say, you know, you may be tempted to use some cute names like, you know, Cooper's Coop or Shattuck's Shack or, you know, Harold's Hangout or something like that. But, you know, don't do that, as tempted as you may be and as familiar as you may be with the participants. I like just plain simple names, you know, Plaintiff Smith's room or Defendant Jones room. The participants can see the name, so don't get too cutesy, be professional there. You may want to, and sometimes I do this, often frankly I don't, but you may want to create an extra caucus room. You can just label it Mediator Conference Room. It's simple enough. And that way, if at some point during the mediation, you want to talk just with the lawyers, you can use that as a breakout room and just meet and talk with the lawyers. I think for those of you who haven't used Zoom as a tool, you'll find the breakout rooms. It's really very seamless to go from one to the other as you leave one conference room, go into the other breakout room. It's much like we would do with conference rooms if we were doing it live. Just a quick reminder, you don't get the knock on the door. Cooper and I were talking earlier this morning. He has a great idea and a great technique. Before he enters a breakout room, he just sort of says, knock, knock. I'll say hello, or I'm back, or something early on. But, just be aware, if you're the mediator, you may just pop into the breakout room. So then next, let me just remind you about recordings of mediations. Of course, under Rule 12 of the Alabama Civil Court Mediation Rules, recordings of mediation sessions are not allowed. So within your settings in Zoom, you'll want to go to recording and disable local recording, cloud recording, automatic recording. I don't think it hurts to give a verbal reminder to the participants that you're not recording and no one else is authorized to record the mediation session. So Cooper's going to pick up talking with you about screen sharing.
Yeah. So if you're going to be doing some screen sharing during the mediation, as with everything else, plan that ahead of time. Go on and have on your desktop what it is you want to share. Go on and move from your desktop those things you don't want people to see. Through Zoom, you can share in a number of different ways. You can share a program, or you can share your actual desktop, your screen, and just be aware of what you pick, that's what you're going to be sharing, and be prepared to do it. There is a function in Zoom where you can do messaging, the chat function. I think it's probably a good idea to think about disabling that before your mediation. And here's why. It's great for us because you can submit comments and questions. That's fantastic. The chat function allows you to speak with everyone involved in the conference or select individuals that you can. It's easy to send something to everyone unintentionally. And because confidentiality is so important to the mediation process, let's just protect the participants from themselves by disabling their opportunity to accidentally chat with everybody. So if they need to chat with you, as Harold said, you've got their cell phone number, they've got yours, they can text you during the mediation. So they don't really need to use that chat function. So you can disable it from their use and still be able to use it yourself. Now, during the mediation itself, there's lots of things to consider. All of those things were things we talked about happening pre-mediation for the mediator. During the mediation itself, one of the things you'll be able to do as the host is mute a participant. Boy, if we could only do that with face-to-face mediation, sometimes that'd be a real bonus. There are two things I wanted to mention that I failed to mention a minute ago, and that has to do with the camera and the sound. One thing to think about with the camera, if you're using the camera that's built into your laptop and you just open it on your desktop, might not be the most flattering angle. Generally, your camera should be at least at eye level or higher. That's the best view for everybody. Earbuds are also helpful, or headphones, because they separate what the microphone is picking up, which is your speech, from what you're hearing. Some of the delays caused in a Zoom meeting are caused by that, the speaker and the microphone being too close together, or causing an interference. So I use AirPods. You don't have to, you can use whatever, and they work really well. I'll give you this little helpful tip from my own mistakes. If you use both AirPods and it's a long mediation, they might die before the end of the mediation. So I alternate. I'll use the right one till it dies and then let it charge while I use the left one. Again, just learn from what I've done that didn't work well. Okay. Tips for lawyers and parties together. Screen sharing. If you are going to, or if the parties want to use screen sharing, you have to enable that ahead of time, that others besides the host can share their screen. You may not want to allow people to share the screen that aren't the host, as exhibited earlier, because they may accidentally share something that isn't intended for the whole group. The view that you have for your mediation is like any other Zoom, where you can have just the speaker view, so whoever is speaking is who you see, or a gallery view where you can see everyone who's participating. I think the gallery view is really the best way to go because it can be confusing. Sometimes it'll pick up a noise in the room and someone will come on the screen, they're not actually talking, and it's a little unnerving. Let's see. Controlling the view, sounds and feedback. Another problem that I had one time in a mediation was the attorney and their client were in the same conference room, each using their own laptop. And those two laptops near each other started picking up what was coming through the speaker of the other and created feedback. Just that just doesn't work. They've got to either be far apart or share in order for that to work effectively. Harold?
All right, so let's talk about, for lawyers and parties, breakout rooms. You're in your breakout room, but again, with your client, but remember the mediator can sort of pop in at any time. Just be mindful of that, be aware of that. You don't get the benefit of the knock on the door unless Cooper's doing your mediation, and then you get to hear knock, knock from him, which I think is a terrific idea, Cooper. Be mindful what's on your screen. I think we all just got a good display of why you need to be cautious about what's on your screen. I'm reminded of, we were doing a Zoom Sunday school class early on, and one of the class participants, who's a dear sweet person, but she didn't realize exactly where her camera was and what was being shown, and she actually had her foot, Cooper, in front of the camera, and really just sort of her big toe was kind of zoomed in. So it was hard not to look over and watch the big toe there. But be aware, lawyers, and tell your clients, be aware of what's on the screen. When you're in your breakout room and the mediator is not there with you, you should have and expect privacy, and you can certainly talk with your client about strategy and next moves and that sort of thing. But keep your client engaged too, and mindful of all the things Cooper talked about earlier in terms of just being aware of what's behind them and noises in their room and that sort of thing. Next, I want to talk about this. What do you do with and how can you use Zoom effectively in a mediation where you have the lawyer is going to be in person in your office, but his or her client is going to be available by Zoom? And I've had this come up a number of times, and yeah, that's a pretty funny comment too. But when the lawyer is there and it's just their client on Zoom, my approach is to encourage the lawyer to bring his or her own laptop and do Zoom on their computer as opposed to doing it on my computer or through our office. And I think that works out much easier both for the lawyer and the client. So then when I go into the conference room where the lawyer is, we put their computer in such a way so that their client can see both of us or can see me, the mediator, and that way I get to interact with their client, But then, when I go to other conference room, of course, they can communicate one-on-one. But just give some thought to that if you know you're going to have a lawyer in person, but a client by Zoom. Join the mediation in advance. Technical glitches do occur, even with the best laid plans, and for a variety of reasons. And sometimes, again, as illustrated today, unfortunately, at the worst of times. But try to get to the mediation, the Zoom mediation, a few minutes in advance. That gives you and the mediator an opportunity to see each other, talk to each other briefly, address any kind of technical issues going on. When technical problems occur, what do you do? Well, the first thing to do is what to do when the computer's not working, the printer's not working, or whatever else. The first corrective action is simply leave the Zoom meeting, sign out, and try to sign back in. And certainly tell your client about that too. That if something happens, just leave the mediation, sign back in, and the mediator will keep an eye out for you, let you back in the mediation. For reasons from a technical standpoint that Cooper and I are not able to explain to you, just signing out and signing back in usually fixes a host of problems in terms of Zoom connections. And then think about a practice session with your client. Do you want to go through a Zoom practice session in advance with your client? Now, some of your clients are going to be very technology savvy. They may work for a technology company. They may deal with Zoom, every day in their lives. And if so, it's probably not necessary to do a practice session. But on the other hand, if you have a client that's not familiar with Zoom, a practice session certainly can be helpful and reassuring for them and make the day go smoother. And then lastly, in the world of COVID, we went from casual Friday to casual Monday through Friday. But if you're going to do a mediation, even if you're going to do a Zoom mediation, let me encourage you to dress for success. Think about, for the parties involved, particularly if you're dealing with an individual plaintiff. I mean, this is their opportunity, right, to sort of have their day in court. It's a very important day for the parties involved, just as it is for the mediator and for the attorneys. So let me encourage you as lawyers to dress for a Zoom mediation, just as you would if you were attending a live mediation. So that wraps up our comments, presentations, and thoughts. Again, I would reiterate, Cooper and I love in-person mediations and the ability to talk with people face-to-face. But if one thing we've learned from COVID, it is that mediations can be successfully and effectively carried out online. So as Dorothy said, she was right. We're not in Kansas anymore, but we really, really appreciate the chance to share with you our thoughts, these ideas and suggestions. And I think if we have some questions, or Cooper and I'll be happy to try to respond to those.
Well, gentlemen,
I'd like to.
I'm sorry.
I'd like to address, Eileen, the what happened, because
thank you.
that's a scary thing for folks doing mediation. And what a great illustration. No, we didn't plan it. And if we had, we would have chosen for it to be displayed differently. But anytime that you have people join Zoom, you can control what they can and can't do. All right. And that's in the setup that you have to do ahead of time. And in this case, we were set up so that both Harold and I could be host and would be able to share our screen and control it. And because of the way some of the signups happen late and whatnot, there are some people that somehow were able to be hosts that weren't supposed to be hosts. And that just happened. That shouldn't happen, but it can happen. And the easiest way to do it when you're in control is to dismiss them. It doesn't happen. It shouldn't happen in your Zoom because people are having to use a password to get in. Eileen's opened this up for it's a free webinar, and whomever can join. Your Zoom's not going to be that way. So there you have some control of who is coming in and out. When they come into the waiting room, you shouldn't allow anybody in that you don't know who they are, and would ask them to identify themselves. So does that, Eileen, do you have anything to add to that? Because I wasn't in control of that.
No, I think you bring up a very good point, and and I'll accept responsibility for this. We did have a few last minute folks sign up, and so I sent them the link. The challenge that you have when you, as compared to mediation, when you're conducting a webinar training, is the links can be shared and with other folks as well. So, and we've heard of this happening before. We just hope that we were able to respond in a cool, calm, collected manner, which can happen to you during any type of webinar, but we apologize for that. The nice thing about mediations when you're setting them up by Zoom is you will know who will be attending your sessions. And so it's not a wide cast net for people joining, and you'll have greater control over that. So thank you all for your patience. We did have, a comment, more of a question too. And Cooper, you may have already addressed this, how can we prevent this from happening when we conduct our own Zoom mediations?
Yeah, it's who you allow in, right? And I don't know what the situation was with this individual, but if they come into the waiting room and it's just a phone number, then before you allow them in, ask who they are, identify themselves, and then you can dismiss them too. As the host, you have that control. But again, even if people were to share the call-in information, by establishing a waiting room up front, you really are the gatekeeper. I'll tell another horror story of a mistake I've made, because that's the way I teach. I have so many mistakes. I have a full curriculum no matter what I'm talking about. But I didn't enable a waiting room for my very first Zoom mediation. The parties were not in a good place with each other, didn't want to even see each other by Zoom. And because I didn't establish the waiting room, they all came in at the same time. And boy, they were so mad with each other. I couldn't even get their attention to move them into the waiting rooms, or the breakout rooms, which I had tried to do ahead of time. So that waiting room gives you a lot of control, because you can let them in and let them out. And then once they're there, you can control it as well.
Yeah, and I might just add a couple of things too. And we maybe didn't make this clear, and I've had this experience too, Cooper, back to we all learn from our mistakes. So, you might want to remind participants too, when you're assigning them to a breakout room, you, the mediator, get to assign them, but they have to accept, to actually get into the breakout room. Otherwise, they're sitting there in the waiting room, just kind of, not able to get in. And we didn't say this too, but intuitively, I think we all know. So, for example, today, and it probably is a good learning experience for all of us, but if something really, really crazy like this went on, don't forget, the backup plan, of course, is you've got everyone's cell phone numbers, probably even office numbers as well. But, if all else fails, you certainly can continue the mediation and just conduct it via telephone. You just don't get to see people. So.
Any questions?
So we are seeing some chat in the chat box about, we understand how the host can control, who comes in and certain functions and such, but there's still a little concern about how somebody can just take control or start writing on your screen and such. Right now, I don't know the answer to that. It's something worthy of looking into. And if we can find out any way to provide 100% foolproof way to prevent that, we'll certainly share that with you.
Yeah, and I'll say this about Zoom too, if you haven't experienced it or if you're new to it, it's a great platform, and I'm not selling it or whatever, but there's some great tutorials online on the Zoom platform. If you go to their website, that will show you how to do just about everything. And it's also highly customizable with lots of features you can turn on and off, lots of features you can turn on and off. So in fact, when this is over, Eileen and Harold and I, and you too, will probably go to Zoom and say, gosh, how did this happen? There's probably some way to turn off that annotation feature. I don't know. But I would encourage you to go to the Zoom website if you want to learn more. You can they also do live training. You can sign up and be in a class, and they can walk you through the basics or particular features. So think about that as well.
And Harold and Cooper, I'll also add that mediate.com also has tutorials available for setting up web-based mediation. So that may be another reference for you to look into.
Great.
And ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you all for joining us today. I did enter into the chat the code for the program evaluation. To enter, it is ACDR 2021. That's ACDR 2021. If you didn't hear me, you can read it in the chat box. We do have a comment that has come up that says, you haven't talked about this, but Zoom is optimized for IBM compatible. And this individual says, I'm using a MacBook Pro and definitely do not have the functionality that others are discussing, but glad to see that there are various trainings available.
Yeah. So AJ, I'm a Mac guy, and so I have all the functionality there too. It could be that you haven't enabled it in your settings. So the Zoom platform works just as well for Mac devices as it does a PC, and it may just be your setup. Eric, great point about making it a webinar instead of a Zoom. That would be a difference. Great point.
Very good.
If you're a mediator in particular too, you might want to be sure there are different levels of Zoom that are out there. I mean, the free Zoom is available, but I think has a 40-minute time limit for sessions. And if you choose the other, I think it's a pro version or whatever of Zoom, right, it's extremely inexpensive. I think it's $50 or $60 for an annual subscription, but that gives you more capabilities and also longer unlimited time sessions as well. So if you are mediating, you might want to take a look at that. So.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, if are there any other questions for our panelists? If not, gentlemen, I'm going to give you an opportunity for closing remarks.
Cooper,
Harold?
go ahead.
Oh, well, I appreciate the opportunity. I think Zoom is here to stay. Virtual mediations and the ability to participate. I don't think it's a bad thing, as Harold noted at the beginning. If we want somebody to be available to join a mediation, just like the rules say, someone with settlement authority must be present or reasonably available to attend. Telephone just quite isn't the same as seeing a face. So Zoom gives us something that we wouldn't otherwise have. And I think it's a positive in those situations.
Yeah, and Cooper and I were talking about before the mediation, there are some stories out there of, unfortunate experiences with Zoom. And obviously, as today's presentation illustrated, strange and unfortunate things can happen. But I do think, the more we as mediators familiarize ourselves with the technology, I was talking to Cooper earlier this morning. I mean, to me, once you've done a few, and especially when you get your breakout rooms set up, really for you, the mediator, it's very simple. You simply go from one breakout room to the other, just as you would go from one conference room to the other. Unfortunately, I don't get very many steps in on those days, and I need all the walking I can get, but it really is pretty seamless kind of exercise once you get everything set up. So if you haven't used Zoom, I would encourage you to. It is a very effective tool, as Cooper said, and we really appreciate Cooper and I both thank you for joining us today. And Eileen, thanks to you and the Dispute Resolution Center for letting us talk about virtual mediation. So